This is the day the Lord has made. Let us rejoice and be glad in it. It's glad to see everybody here this morning, especially our visitors and our family coming over from Kashmir again. It's always a pleasure to have you here. We are going to study Noah, about the ark, and I've decided this morning that I'm going to split the sermon up. I had 28 slides, and the more I looked at it, I decided to cut it in half. So we'll look at the flood next week. If you're not going to be here, you have to listen to it online. So that's what we're going to do. And as I stated last week, we've been going through the first part of Genesis. We've looked at Genesis 1 through 5. Last week we looked at the first half of Genesis 6. Today we'll start in the middle of Genesis 6 and continue on. We'll look at 6 and 7 this morning, and then next week we'll look at chapters 8 and 9 of Genesis. When you think of the flood, what do you think of? And we'll look at this picture again next week. To me, this is what I think of, are the flood waters rising and the thousands of people that were not on the ark are drowning. You know, all of the debris is coming up and floating like you would see in a flood that we see, you know, around the world just about yearly. All the debris floating and them holding on to it like after a shipwreck, you know, trying to stay afloat. And that's what we think of. That's what it was like when the flood occurred. We're going to start in Genesis 6, verse 13. Like I said, we covered down to verse 12 last week, so we'll pick up here in verse 13. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Make yourself an ark of gopher wood. Make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch for waterproofing. And thus, this is how you shall make it. The length of the ark shall be 300 cubits, the width 50 cubits, and the height 30 cubits. So what is a cubit? Well, a cubit, because they didn't have measuring sticks and all back then, a cubit was just a general measurement that they used from your elbow to the tips of your fingers. And it was usually about 18 inches. I measured mine yesterday, and I'm 18 and a quarter inch. So that would be the height of a cubit. So when you look at it being 300 cubits by 50 cubits by 30 cubits high, that comes out to about 510 cubits long, 85 feet long, and 51 feet high. And so that was the size of the ark. So when you look at that, something that we can compare it to, especially more than others, we look at a football field. A football field measuring just the lines is 100 yards, okay, from the end zone on to the other end zone. And a yard is about 3 feet. So that would be about 300 feet. And then you can see here, they've taken a second football field and they've started the 1 yard line right at the end zone. So they've added another 50 yards. So that would be 450 feet. So the ark was a football field and a half long. And this is showing that a football field is 180 feet wide, which half of that would be 90 feet. The ark was only 75 feet, so not quite a half of a football field wide and 75 feet tall. Now, I was looking at different pictures and getting different things and everything else. And, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. 45 feet high and 75 feet wide. My wife's back there. No, you know. So, but when you look at the measurements and with everything in the Bible, they just don't agree. When I was looking at pictures to show you, they had different measurements. Because some places they measure a cubit at a different length than 18 inches. But generally, that's what they come up with. And so that's what I'm showing you here is what is generally thought to be the size of the ark. And as we saw, the ark was to have 3 layers. or 3 levels, 3 decks, whatever. And this is just, again, an artist's perception, because we just read what God told Moses. He told him, go forward. God gave Noah the measurements, what to make it out of, and having 3 decks. How those decks are designed, we don't know. Here's one artist's conception, which makes sense, putting all the animals on the bottom. You always want to make your weight on the bottom so they're not top heavy. Here they have the second deck as being for food, and we'll get into that later. And the top layer was for living quarters, which they don't actually show on there, but having your lightweight animals like your smaller animals and your birds in that. The one on the right, again, is showing the 3 decks, but I like the fact that on this one, they actually incorporated a watering system. They've taken bamboo and have the water dripping down into containers or pens for the water, because that's something, again, you're taking care of all these animals, you've got to do that. So how did they do it? Well, they either had designed something like this that collected water off the deck and dropped it down, or they had to go up and collect water somehow. But again, the ark was sealed, so they had to be able to get water to bring it down to water the animals. And so I kind of like that idea. The other thing I liked about that one on the right is, if you'll notice, the giraffes are babies. You know, the rhinoceros, I think it is, I think it was rhinoceros, and those are hippos, are babies. You know, nowhere does it say that the animals that went on board were full grown, but that's what we always think of, and that's how we see pictures. Maybe in order to save space, they were babies. They were smaller animals in order to take up less space, and so they could get them all on board. We don't know. All we know is that we'll read is that they put 2 of them, a male and a female, but it doesn't give the size. But too many times I think we narrow it down. We look at blinders. Well, this is how it is. This is how the pictures show it, you know. And so that's what we think of. And sometimes we need to think outside of the box when we're looking at these things in order to see and maybe understand it a little bit better as to how things were done during these times. I'll show you a couple of pictures. The top 3 are actual arks that were built. The one on the left was built by Johann Hubergs. This was done in the town of Dordrecht, Holland. And the one on the 2 on the top right are the ones that are in Kentucky. Williamsburg, is that what it is? Yeah, Williamstown, Kentucky. At the Ark Encounter. And this is one that a lot of people have seen pictures of, and I've talked to people and they want to go see this. But this is there, and the one on the right is the front picture, the one in the middle is the back of the Ark. And then the bottom 3 are just drawings that I took off the internet. And you'll notice that some of these, as we will have noticed, are not biblically correct, because how many doors, how many windows? 1 of each. But yet we see here that they have windows. This one's got windows all the way down the side of the ark. There was one drawing that I had seen last week, I couldn't find it this week, that showed a door for each level of the ark so they could get the animals in. So again, when you look at things on the internet, you need to know the scriptures, because what you see usually is not correct. Now, I disagree with the storms that they have shown in the bottom 2 on the right. And the reason I disagree with it is, and that's what we think about with rain. Well, there's usually thunder and lightning. If you've been out in the water, there's waves and, huge waves. I don't think that is correct. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights. If it was lightning storms like you see here, that's going to be terrifying to the animals. How do animals react? How do you react with that boom of the lightning? Okay, it wouldn't be a flash because there's no windows except for the one window and it was shut. But that's going to scare the animals. And so I don't think there was lightning. There wasn't a huge storm like that. I think it was just raining. When you look at the waves, again, the ark was not built, I don't think, to maneuver around. I think the ark was built more like this picture depicts, as being squarish, as being a huge rectangle. For one, that utilizes the space more readily. It does not, again, have to go from a port to a port. It doesn't have to be seaworthy. It does not have a sail, does not have an engine, does not have a rudder. It's not made to maneuver on the water. It has one function or two functions. I think it was nothing more than a large livery stable to store all the animals in, but all it has to do is float and to rise. That's all the ark had to do. And so I think this is more of a true depiction of what the ark was. He gives them the dimensions, and that's how he built it. Again, we don't know. We just read the only instructions that God gave him. This length, this width, this height, build it. Okay? So to me, again, I think it was like this. And again, I don't think the waves were that big. Again, because the ark was not designed to do that kind of maneuvering on the water. I think the waters just rose. It was raining and water rose, and the ark rose with it. Again, that's my opinion. That's how I see this. I do have a small amount of boating background growing up on the Gulf. But that's how I pick it, and that's what I wanted to share with you this morning. So let's go back to the scripture in Genesis 6, verse 16. You shall make a window for the ark, and you shall finish it to a cubit from above, and set the door out of the ark in its side. You shall make it with lower, second, and third decks. And behold, I myself am bringing floodwaters on the earth to destroy from under heaven all flesh, in which is the breath of life. Everything that is on the earth shall die. Everything. But I will establish my covenant with you, and you shall go into the ark, you, your sons, your wife, and your sons' wives with you. Verse 19, and of every living thing of all flesh you shall bring 2 of every sort into the ark, to keep them alive with you. They shall be male and female. Now we get the idea of only 2 animals of every kind, 2 aardvarks, 2 horses, 2 sheep, 2 whatever, because that's what we see here. But we're going to read another scripture in a minute that gives a little bit more detail on this. But God gives more detail, and like I said, that we'll look at in verse 20. Continuing on, of the birds after their kind, of animals after their kind, and every creeping thing on the earth after its kind. All creeping things on the earth, worms, roaches, ants, bugs, beetles, slugs, are all going to be destroyed. But they are vital to the earth. So Noah and his family have got to collect all these things. God's going to bring them to him. And they've got to collect these and put them on the ark and take care of them. I saw a cartoon several years ago when I was at Kashmir, and I thought I had saved it, but I couldn't find it. And it shows Noah and his wife eating at the table, and this roach comes crawling across the table, and she gets a shoe off and is going to hit it. He screams, "No!" Because there's only 2 of them. A lot of us, especially from the South, wish she had killed it. But those are the things that they had to collect. Not only the animals, but the birds and creeping things of the earth. 2 of every kind will come to you and keep them alive. And you shall take for yourself of all food that is eaten, and you shall gather it to yourself, and it shall be food for you and for them. So we see here that Noah and his family have got to collect all the food, as we'll see later on, for a year. But they've also got to collect the food for the animals. Imagine collecting the food for every different type of animal. All the animals eat a lot of different foods, don't they? A wolf is going to eat something different than an elephant, different than a giraffe, different than a koala bear, different than an anteater. Then you got to look at the birds. When you look at birds that eat seeds, or birds that eat dead roadkill, dead animals. And you got to look at the worms and the bugs and everything that they're eating. So they've got to collect all this food to feed all these animals and store it on the ark. Now, some believe that, well, possibly, the animals' metabolism was dropped down to where they didn't eat as much. Or maybe they hibernated so they didn't eat as much. Because you've also got the animal waste that they've got to deal with, and the ammonia and the smells and everything. So maybe, as you see in some pictures, they've got vents, not necessarily windows, but vents to allow that to happen. We don't know. We don't know what the daily life was on the ark. We don't know what they did to take care of all that. But think about that when we think about the story, because again, it doesn't elaborate when we read these chapters in Genesis as to what the life was, the daily life was on the ark. But these are things that they had to take care of, that they had to deal with, that they had to manage for a year, floating in this ark with nothing else. That was their life, was taking care of these animals for a very good reason. And in verse 22, thus Noah did according to all that God commanded him, so he did. How long did it take to build the ark? Scripture doesn't tell us. We don't know. Who helped Noah to build the ark? Maybe his sons. We don't know how old they were at the time of the building, because again, we don't know when it started. We just know that the flood started when Noah was 600 years old. A lot of people say maybe 75 years to build it, 150 years, we don't know. But again, Noah is in his 500s. Imagine building an ark of this size by hand when you're over 500 years old. And it's not, going down to the local store and buying the wood. No, he's got to go out and cut the trees down and trim them down and cut them to size and do whatever. And again, when you look at the construction of the ark, when you're looking at boughs and doing everything like that, that takes a lot of extra wood and carving and everything. Whereas if you built it with square timbers and made it square, rectangular, like I had said, it was a whole lot easier to build and faster to build. So again, that's another reason that I think it was more of a squarish, rectangular shaped ark than what we think of as a boat. Again, Scriptures does not tell us what it was. So, how many of each of the animals were saved from the flood? We will probably all respond with two, a male and a female, just as we read on the last slide. But there were so many species that they all had to replenish. So let's flip over to chapter 7 and see what else the Lord has to say to Noah. Then the Lord said to Noah, "Come into the ark, you and all of your household, because I have seen that you are righteous before me in this generation. You shall take with you 7, each of every clean animal, a male and his female, 2 each of animals that are unclean, a male and his female. Also 7 each of birds of the air, male and female, to keep the species alive on the face of all the earth." So God is saying to bring in of the clean animals 7, and of the birds 7 of each, male and female. But of the unclean only bring 2 each, a male and a female. So how many of each kind of animals was saved on the ark? Not just 2 as we always think. First thing I want to point out is what is meant by the word each of every kind. When you go through and you look at the commentaries, the scholars have 2 ideas that they think that this word each means. Some of them believe that 7 each means 7 pairs. So you would have 7 pairs of each of the clean animals, but only 1 pair of the unclean. In the same way with the birds. You would have 7 pairs of clean birds and only 2 of the unclean birds. But others say that would be way too many animals to bring onto the ark. Some of them think that instead of 7 pairs, that it's talking about 3 pairs of 2 and an odd one. So you'd have a male, 3 three male-female pairs, but then you would have a third one, or a third which make up the seventh. Okay? And we'll see later on where that comes into play. The other thing that they look at as far as the clean and unclean. When we think of that, we think of Deuteronomy 14 and Leviticus 11, where the Levitical law was passed down as to what was clean animals and what was dirty animals or unclean animals. And God got very specific. He listed as far as the animals, the birds, he goes down into creeping things, and fish, on what was clean, considered clean that they could eat, and what was considered unclean and what they could not eat. And if you want to get a detailed list of that, again, go to Leviticus 11 or Deuteronomy 14 to read that. But most of the scholars believe that that's not what they were referring to here in Genesis, God talking to Noah, because that Levitical law had not been passed down yet. Okay? So what they considered clean and unclean was how they used the animals or what the animals ate, which again goes back to the Levitical law. Okay? Again, we don't know specifically what was divided into clean and unclean because the scriptures do not get into detail at this point. It just says of the clean animals, you take 7 each, and in the unclean, you take 2 each, animals and birds. Okay. Verse 4. For after 7 more days, I will cause it to rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. And I will destroy from the face of the earth all living things that I have made. And Noah did according to all the Lord commanded him. Noah was 600 years old when the flood waters were on the earth. And we read last week where God said that he was going to destroy not only all of man, but all animals and all greenery. And when you consider, when you flood the earth for a year, as we'll see next week, there's nothing that can survive. And so God is making way and making plans for the new earth that's going to come after the flood. God has given Noah 2 timelines here. The first is that it's going to start raining in 7 days. So get everything loaded, get everything prepared, get ready. Because in 7 days, the ark is closing and it's going to start raining. And the next thing is, it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And we see 40 being a dominant or an important number in the scriptures. We saw that when we looked at Jesus being tempted, and he fasted for 40 days. But we see it in several places. So this is an important number, but it's going to rain for 40 days and 40 nights. And Noah was going to be 600 years old when the flood started. Again, the Bible does not state how old he was when he started building the ark or how long it took him, but it does specifically tell us that he was 600 years old when it started to rain. So verse 7 of Genesis 7. So Noah with his sons, his wife, and his sons' wives went into the ark because of the waters of the flood, of clean animals, of animals that were unclean, of birds, and of everything that creeps on the earth. 2 by 2 they went into the ark to Noah, male and female, as God had commanded Noah. Now verse 9 gives credit to the scholars and to those who believe that the 7 of each meant 7 pairs of each. Because here it lists that the animals got on board the ark 2 by 2 by 2, not 2 by 2 by 2 and 1. So again, this gives credence to them who believe that it was 7 pairs. Again, the Bible does not specifically state that. Now, one commentary stated, as far as the difference between the clean and unclean animals, holds true today in the animal world. And they said that the clean and unclean had to deal with the types of animals that they were. He said today, on this case here, they were bringing in more of the clean animals that Noah would use once they got off the ark, because again, they had to start from scratch. They had to start anew. They had to start plowing and making food. Okay? And so there would be more cattle, there would be more horses, there would be more oxen, more sheep and things like that they would use. So that was the reason more was included on the ark. And compared to the unclean animals would be more of the ferocious type of animals. And they say you see that today in the animal kingdom, in that we have more cattle, more bison, more sheep, more goats, and we don't have as many tigers and bears and lions, oh my, you know. And he says, aren't we glad that it's that way and not the reversed order to where there's more of the ferocious animals. So that was just his idea of the difference between the clean and unclean. Again, the Bible doesn't state, the Bible only states clean and unclean. It's up to you to decide what that is going to be. From verses 10 on deals with the actual flood itself, and this is where I decided to stop this morning due to time mainly, and the amount of space or amount of information that I have in the last two chapters. So if you would, go ahead and finish reading the rest of chapter 7, starting in verse 10, chapters 8 and 9. We will cover that next week and discuss what happened with the flood and what happens after the flood, because there's some important aspects of that after the flood that we need to cover as well. If there's anything that we can do for you this morning, if you're having problems in your life, troubles in your life, and you need prayers, let us know. Let us help you. Let us pray for you. Let us do what the Scriptures tells and encourage you and to be there for each other. Let us help share in your burdens. Maybe you haven't put Christ on in baptism yet, and that's something that you realize that you need to do, that you need to go to heaven. We can help you with that sin problem as well this morning. Just please let your wishes be known as together we stand and sing.